Right, so I'm really thrilled to welcome our first speaker, Nia Witherspoon, who the writer Sharon Bridgeforth described as, quote, one of the most important playwrights of her generation. She's also a theatre maker, vocalist, composer, and cultural worker investigating the metaphysics of Black liberation, desire, and diaspora. She's the multimedia writer in residence at Fordham University, a Creative Capital awardee, a Jerome New Artist Fellow, and a BAX Brooklyn Arts Exchange, and was between 2017 and 2018 a playwright directing fellow at New York Theatre Workshop. Nia's held tenure-track professorships at Florida State University and Arizona State University, has published in numerous journals and collections, and is currently working on a manuscript tentatively titled Nation in the Dark, a Black Femme's Spell for Justice. She's also an artist in residence at Here Art Center, which is one of the project partners for the Staging Decadence project, where she's developing a new piece called Priestess of Twerk, which is inspired by hip hop, the reproductive justice movement, and the sacred sex workers that graced Egyptian temples. And it's also the subject of her talk tonight. So over to you, Nia. At the moment we can't see you. Oh, there you are. Excellent. I'm going to switch my camera off now and over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, wherever here is for the folks that are on the webinar. I will just dive in, but just give me a moment to share my screen. Okay, great. So as Adam mentioned, I'll be talking about my new work in progress, Priestess of Twerk, a Black femme temple to pleasure. Black women and femmes live in a constant state of being denied truth, access, money, health, security, respect. Black women and femmes have always found ways to care for ourselves and each other in ways that superseded what society has offered us, i.e., hoodoo as a form of desire expression, actualization, and self-governance, adorning ourselves, sister circles, IG filters, susus, girls' nights out, cooking and cohabitating, babysitting, arranging flowers, dreaming of sky and sea. Priestess of Twerk builds on existing practices and imagines new spaces for Black femme care. Built on ancient goddess cultures, contemporary Black femme sacred texts, and modalities of being offered by bad bitch ratchetry. Even though Black girls are magic, we are not immune. We are not unaffected. We are, in fact, vulnerable, most affected. We bear iterative grief and lifetimes of unshed tears. Because we had to be the strong Black woman or Black femme, the mule of the world, the negress, but no more. So we are not here in Priestess of Twerk to solve the problems of anyone else while we continue to suffer. Like the Combahee River Collective, we know that the healing of Black women and femmes will inevitably, ultimately free everyone if we could just have the space to do what needs to be done, to say what needs to be said, and to take our God-given time to be slow and intentional about our healing. Recently, Black Feminist Futures curated a panel on Black femmes to which I was an eager attendant. There, Dr. Kaya Green said, "Is femme a useful category for us?" And Dr. Savannah Shange said, "Femme is not useful. It doesn't make anything, produce anything. It has no utility to anyone but me." And I was overcome with one of the manifesto statements for Priestess. I wrote, "The politics of uselessness. I commit to not being useful. I commit to making a space whose primary focus is pleasure. There's so much self-permission inherent in that statement, so much internal decolonization, so much release available to us when we refuse to play the mule of the world. There is also so much danger. When we refuse to play the mule, we are in some ways even more vulnerable because we are defying the groove global capital has set out for us. The space left behind in the imprint of the mule on the earth is where we conjure our Black feminist visioning of excess, of decadence. Certainly, it's critical that we navigate this terrain of material, of product, of high design carefully. I do not want us to create or nurture desire for excess in a way that feeds the machine of global capital and its methodology of one, making us feel like we are not already enough naked, that we need products to be whole, and two, that actively pillages the body of the earth and makes war with the global south to obtain those products. In fact, there are multiple experiences inside the temple that actually seek to reunite Black women with our deep and abiding relationship with the Great Mother. I am, however, through what I'm calling the politics of adornment, in combination with the curation of this live experience, interested in shifting our psychosocial imaging and reference, as well as our somatic experience to create apertures that shift our notions of ourselves as easeful, as held, as contextualized, as expansive, as possible, as stunning, as world-making, as imaginative, as shape-shifting, and as brilliant as we need to see ourselves in order to break the mold of the mule. It is important to note that it is critical for Priestess of Twerk to be experienced with live bodies. Because from my vantage point, it feels like whenever we do get to see Black women exhibiting on this exponential level of fabulous, i.e. Michelle Obama, Beyonce, Shaka Khan, it is mediated by screens and a part of the cult of celebrity that we live vicariously through instead of being of the earth, of the people, and around after the ritual, during and after the ritual. I'll get to this more briefly, but this is also why there's a space where participants in the ritual have the opportunity to transform themselves as a part of the process and to initiate themselves as priestesses of twerk. So the liveness really matters to me quite a lot. I'm guided by a set of questions that drive my research and shape my modes of inquiry, which I'll share. What do ancient Swana, so Southwest Asian and North African, and West African knowledges offer, grapple with in the way of what it means to be a woman? How do women gather and share space? How have we cared for our bodies and spirits from ancient to contemporary times? What do Black women writers of the 70s, 80s, and 90s have to teach us about the experiences of love, joy, and pleasure in our bodies? How is Black feminism a guide for healing justice? What do Black women rappers have to teach us about accessing our power and pleasure? What do sex workers have to teach us about the same? What does the reproductive justice movement have to teach us about reimagining the relationships with our bodies? Priestess of Twerk aims to start, collate, curate a living record of some of the answers to these questions. In my particular vantage point, I have a white mother, so where I look for guidance around liberated Black womanhood, it's already once removed. But also what I find when I look at even a generation back more deeply is that there are holes all over the place. Folks' access to full-bodied liberation is limited by social mores, respectability, religion, and all other ways of performing that white supremacy requires. And so I wanted to make a space of sea and sky where Black women could lean on, because Black feminists were writing precisely inside of that hole. Audre Lorde and Toni Cade and other Black feminists and women of color feminists writing reared me in ways that my own mother and grandmother couldn't. They offered for me and continue to offer so many of us a genealogy of freedom, a cosmology of fugitivity to tap into and continue imagining. And yet they're not celebrity. They're not shiny or sparkly outside of a small but mighty few of us working to keep their legacies front and center. And so I want to offer space also to draw attention to their legacies and truly honor their contributions, to read them as sacred texts and to create rituals for healing, dreaming, and revolution grounded in their teachings. There is sacrifice attached to writing from the freest place inside oneself and dreaming up a new free world where humanity can rejoin the harmonics of life on earth. There is sacrifice as a Black woman. Most of these women died before their time. Black women experience higher instances of stress-related illnesses and body deterioration. Black women are accurately diagnosed less, treated for pain less, and otherwise neglected in the medical industrial complex. Priestess of Twerk, a Black femme temple to pleasure, is also thus about agency, learning, and self-determination in relationship to our whole body healing outside of Western paradigms which continue to misapprehend, mistreat, and neglect us. We are taking back control. So I'm going to shift here to talk about how I'm envisioning the various spaces and how they interact with the whole picture. Upon entering the sacred space, participants will be greeted by twerk priestesses in erotic, holy regalia, asked to take their shoes off and receive an orientation about how to be in the space, i.e. rule number 1, Black women, femmes are sacred and will be prioritized in this space. They will then be cleansed, outfitted, and then go for an individual divination with twerk priestesses. In this divination, they will receive their own tailored map for how they should move through the temple based on the healing that they need as an individual. Participants will also be given a book of spells in the Black feminist monastic tradition to help them move through. In addition to saunas and baths, the medicinal spaces participants may be prescribed include dream chamber, birth chamber, transition chamber, menses chamber, erotica chamber, flora chamber. In this world, there are also chambers and shrines dedicated to Black feminist patron saints: Octavia, both Tonys, Audrey, June, Belle, Alice. Each chamber contains its own medicine and spaces for individual and collective healing, facilitated by priestesses of that space. Also, the temple itself is alive and communicates. So the building, the space that is holding is alive and communicates. So regardless of what is prescribed or planned, things happen that are larger than that in regards to the weather of the moment inside the building, inside the big priestess body. After everyone in each cycle has completed their ritual, they will be invited to witness a musical play that ritually chronicles the journey of Isis to the underworld to reunite with her sister Nephthys, shedding respectability, embracing embodiment, and healing our relationship with the sacred erotic. Finally, the temple operates as a fully functioning space. So it's open to Black women and femmes during the day before it's open to the public at night for the performance. And during the day, it functions as a free spa and healing space. And this will be for the month that it runs before it goes on tour. A bit more about kind of my imaginative mapping of the spaces, to say a little about each of them. So the first thing is the healing space spa. In this spa, there's going to be plant medicine, a portable jacuzzi, steam room, infrared sauna, heated lounging, resting spaces, stones and crystals. And there are also going to be practitioners that are present. So acupuncturists, massage therapy, Reiki, curated herbal blends, art therapy, painting, etc. So that is what this kind of spa healing space offers. The next space I'm calling for now the Transformer Room. Toni Cade Bambara said about the name that she created for herself, Toni Cade Bambara. She said, Toni Cade Bambara, the minute I said it, I immediately inhabited it. I felt very at home in the world. This was my name. Kai Green, the same scholar I cited before, talks about how renaming is a Black feminist genealogy. And Toni Kane Bambara says in that same essay that it's a spiritual practice. So thinking about adornment also as naming, as a way of naming, level 1 of the transformer room is simply choosing from the array of priestess regalia what you'd like to tap into during the course of your time in the temple. Masks, boas, lingerie, robes, eyelash and nail extensions, wigs. The final level, however, is that you are called to initiate into the order of priestesses, the order of Hurston, Lord, Morrison, Shange, Johnson, Butler, and Bambara, and actually get to call in a new name for yourself. So in the transformer room, echoing the magic of bathrooms and Black queer club nightlife, we love on each other in the process of becoming. We encourage new, dangerous, imaginative versions of ourselves and each other that we want to call in. In the transformer room, we are named and will ultimately walk down the sacred runway. And we are calling in a partnership here with Savage Fenty. So I'm naming that in all of my public engagements because the universe is listening. For those of you that don't know, Savage Fenty is Rihanna's lingerie company. For the altar rooms, right? They're dedicated to Black and brown women artists and activists, that they will be called together in the process of a research retreat. Folks that we're interested in building altars for include Octavia Butler, Audre Lorde, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Toni Cade Bambara, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, Ntozake Shange, Adrienne Kennedy. And these are some existing altars and some images of the women. Octavia Butler and Audre Lorde is on top. Another aspect is this notion of thrones of flowers for the living. Black women like Charlene Carruthers, Adrienne Marie Brown, and Patrice Cullors, as well as artists like Okwe Okpokwasili and Linda LaBeija, deserve their flowers while they're alive. For this reason, we will have thrones made of flowers for honored guests, so that there's like an honored place also to experience this from. Folks who are incredibly world-making and world-shaping. And we don't want to wait, right, until folks have to be dug up in the archives. We want to make sure that folks' legacies are honored while they're alive, and that that's something that they get to witness as a part of their own somatic experiencing and a part of the legacy that they can pass on. Not dying, feeling like, wondering, you know, if they had made any impact at all. We want to make it clear the impact that other Black women and femmes are having on us in real time. And then the additional chambers, I mentioned before, dream chamber, birth chamber, menstruation chamber, gender affirmation chamber, sacred erotic chamber, relationship chamber. These will all be dreamed up in collaboration with dream workers, healing practitioners, midwives and doulas, trans consultants around gender affirmation, marriage and family therapists, sex therapists, et cetera. Really thinking about like what, and transformative justice practitioners. So really thinking about what kind of a space would really facilitate deep healing, right? And outside of traditional talk therapy models. So really working across like mental health realms, kind of healing realms, indigenous knowledge realms, and sacred practice realms, and really and political realms, and really kind of like stirring it up, getting all the folks in the room together and dreaming up these different spaces for very particular experiences of healing. The last thing I'll talk about is the play aspect of it, of the piece. So all of that you experience, but when you are finished with your individual ritual, you move into this collective experience of a play. And some of our most kind of transformative ancient plays have been performed over and over again and are like performed yearly or performed with the spring solstice or the winter equinox, right? So like this notion of this play as a remembering, kind of tapping into all of these other rememberings that and a new imagining for the when. Like when we perform this play, It's so that we remember X, Y, and Z. So I'm kind of like asserting what that could be for the now, in the hopes for its own continuance and legacy and futurity. The Sumerian story of Inanna's descent is where, and if this is the story of Inanna's descent, but in my version, the Egyptian goddess Isis plays Inanna. The story of Inanna's descent is that she's called to the underworld by her sister, and on her way, she has to cross 7 gates and shed her jewels and items of clothing at each gate. So because of this, the story of Inanna has been taken up by many sex work and sex positive activists and thinkers in the now. When Inanna arrives to the underworld, her sister tries to trap her there, and it's only through witnessing her sister's grief beneath the actions, like the actions on the top where I'm trapping you here, but there was grief beneath it. And it was only through the recognition of that the sisters were able to, that Inanna was able to return to the world of the living, and the sisters were able to affect each other's worlds. The ancient Egyptian story of Isis and Osiris is similar. Isis too needs to travel to the underworld to see her twin sister, but Isis's motivation is to find and resuscitate her lover Osiris. In both cases, the sisters of the underworld and upper world are forced to collaborate and reimagine each of their worlds as an act of cosmic rebalancing. So I'm going to take you, I'll read to you an excerpt from the dramaturgical note that introduces the play portion of Priestess of Twerk, so you can see how both stories are kind of showing up. Seth, king of the underworld, dies. For our purposes, he is the king of cis-het white supremacist patriarchy. Isis, his sister-in-law, is summoned to the underworld to visit her twin sister Nephthys for Seth's funeral. It is unavoidable. There is much fear that accompanies this journey. It is possible to lose yourself in the mythos of a society built against the flourishing and sacredness of Black women. Isis and the priestesses of Isis palace accompany her down to the underworld. They must cross 7 gates, and at each gate they lose an item of clothing, performing a ritual striptease, symbolically shedding toxic projections placed upon them. When they arrive at the final gate and the doors to the underworld open vis-a-vis a dramatic reveal, they see that it is actually a glorious place. They are welcomed by Nephthys, Isis's twin sister and queen of the underworld. Instead of a funeral, they arrive at a celebration of sacred sexuality, a space where the erotic is power. And they also learn that that Nephthys has actually murdered her husband. And so they are all celebrating like in a ding dong, the witch is dead moment, not the funeral that she thought she would be arriving at. Once inside, after song, dance, hypersensory experience, they participate in a twerk meditation and end with a dominatrix performance, where audiences are invited to read aloud Black feminist sacred text. I'm just going to show a clip from that. And this is on their way from gate 6 into gate 7. And the last thing that they have to take off is their crown.
Chicken, hot and top, wet, nasty girl. Real greasy giants for the bathroom with sugar sweet. Hey, Black girl, nobody could ever hear your ugly mouth speak. Cover up your cellulite sweet eat. When you get on the danger, get on the floor. She will snake bitch away. Fried chicken, hot and top, wet, nasty girl. Greasy giants, flour, apple, everything your ugly mouth speak. Cover up your cellulite sweat eat. A young danger, get on the floor. The she-wolf snake bitch awaits.
Fried chicken, hot and top, wet, nasty girl, real greasy, giant mother Africa, sugar sweet paste, Black girl, nobody should ever hear your ugly mouth speak. Cover up your cellulite sweat, eat her young danger, get on the floor. She-wolf snake bitch awaits.
Fried chicken, hot and top, wet, nasty girl, hot and top, Africa, sugar sweet paste, nobody's coming here.
Wet, nasty girl, real greasy.
actually. Oops, I didn't need to go back, sorry. I'll stop it here, and then I'll just say, so basically, after this happens and the sisters finally figure it out what it is they need from each other in order to reunite, and really it's thinking about what are the kind of discarded aspects of feminists that we have had to endure and that must necessarily be reclaimed in order to participate in our full healing and evolutionary purpose. that after this happens, symbolized by the sisters reuniting, that we can actually celebrate. And there is a subsidiary aspect of the piece that is my rap alter ego, Isis, making an album of music that then will be performed in a club concert setting afterwards. So we will leave the kind of more theatrical space. We will go downstairs into this dungeon that has erotic go-go dancers that feels like a sex party a bit. There's a little back area where consensual play can happen. And then the regular club part, it will be a concert that of Isis's music that then kind of like evolves into a club celebrating Black femme legacy. So Whitney, Janet, Aretha, Shaka, Donna, Grace Jones, John Tay, Cakes Tequila, right? Little known and widely known. And that is how it will kind of close. I think that I'm at time. So I had one more clip I was going to show, but it's a couple of minutes. And so I think I'll close there. And then, you know, if there's time later, maybe during Q&A, I can respond with, with the other clip. Okay, I'm going to stop the share now. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, thank you, Nia. I think there probably will be time to play that clip during the Q&A if it seems appropriate to do so. But just thank you for introducing us to that work, whetting our appetite for it, I should say as well, giving us such a clear and evocative sense, not just of what it looks like, but what it will feel like as well. And you touched on some areas that seem profoundly relevant to the broader topic of decadence, and looking forward to delving into some of that in the Q&A. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen now. Yeah, they won't disappear, and we can come back to them later on. We're going to move straight on to Angel Rose's talk now. I started writing a bio for Angel Rose, but then I ended up rereading a zine that Angel was working on with another artist called Oozing Gloop in 2014, I think the first one was. And I want to read you the bio as it appears in there, because I think it's more evocative than anything I could write. Angel Rose was born in 1989 in London. She spent her childhood in Hollywood sulking under the Californian sun. Angel's world was turned upside down, but David Ginger Spice left for the Spice Girls, prompting her to turn towards the dark side from whence she's never looked back. Her LA upbringing provided a backdrop that helped Angel formulate her distinctive aesthetic, otherwise known as disco goth. At age 21, she returned to London, seeking asylum in the dark comfort of the city's best nightclubs. And after graduating from art school, she was ordained as the supreme high priestess of fag haggery. Angel has since retired the title, but won't be hanging up her cloven heels anytime soon. So in terms of what's been happening since then, her work's been exhibited internationally and shown in spaces such as the Pompidou Centre, Somerset House, the ICA, the BFI. Her first solo show, Sick Bag, was presented in 2016 at the Residence Gallery in London. She's presented research and taught at institutions like Central St. Martin's, NYU and Columbia University, and she's currently living in Hastings, where she teaches art history and theory at University Centre Hastings. And her talk tonight, I guess, also wins the prize for the best neologism, titled Excessentialism.
Let me share my screen. Okay, everybody can hear me and see the screen? No problems? All right, I guess I'll start then. So this is existentialism. The performance artist Kember Thaler taught me that you can change the meaning of an object simply by changing its color. She said that if America really wanted to change its politics, it should start by painting the White House black. The White House, that is the political authority of a country run by white supremacy, is clearly not a whiteness we can take for granted. Not only is it symbolic of its own history, but it displays the ways in which the color white, as well as a generalized whiteness, is taken for granted as a false neutral. Similarly, in the essay Inside the White Cube, Brian O'Doherty explains that the apparent blankness of the white cube gallery style is not just an empty space with which to fill art, as it is already inevitably loaded, filled to the brim with its own political history as a symptom of post-war modernism. This makes me think of all the books I've read, and how pretty much all of them, except for zines photocopied on brightly colored flyer paper, have been printed with black ink on white paper. Why do our school textbooks have to be white? Why can't they be pink? Why is white paper seen as the blank slate? The blank slate is hardly a blank slate when we consider that the bleaching process for paper is an active process, one that requires laborious effort and expensive technologies. In the movie Legally Blonde, the protagonist, Elle Woods, hands out a copy of her CV on pink watermelon scented paper, and her supervisor scoffs at her, dumbfounded. This comedic moment illustrates a very real dynamic at play in wider society, in which a sense of seriousness is established by favoring the masculine, which is falsely presented as neutral, while rejecting the colorful, the feminine, and the sensual as so-called decorative aesthetics. In the book Chromophobia, David Batchelor considers this issue in detail. The central argument of the book is that a societal fear of corruption or contamination through color permeates all of Western culture. Batchelor uses examples from literature and art to explain the ways in which color is both feared and trivialized at the same time. So he says here, in his words, color is made out to be the property of some sort of foreign body, the feminine, the oriental, the primitive, the infantile, the vulgar, the queer, or the pathological. Or else, color is relegated to the realm of the superficial, the supplementary, the inessential, or the cosmetic. Color is dangerous or trivial, or it is both. Either way, color is routinely excluded from the higher concerns of the mind. It is regarded as other to the higher values of Western culture. So sometimes I think perhaps this notion stems from the idea of, the way that we create representational art, as in form comes first, and then color is something that fills in the form. But in any case, the presumed non-essentiality of color, or secondary experience, as Batchelor calls it, means that we do not take colorful things so seriously. In fact, someone once told me that they loved the first issue of the Serious Fun zine, which is pictured here, except for the crazy, colorful aesthetics which distract from the gravitas of the content. But for me, color is not a distraction. Color is invigorating. In fact, when I was diagnosed with dyslexia, I learned that some dyslexic students are encouraged to use colored overlays while reading text on a screen or in a book. So they get these plastic sheets that tint everything a bright color. And so this is supposed to reduce the symptoms of visual stress and increase reading fluency. But interestingly, there is no concrete evidence or science to support how this actually works. So could it be that the colored overlays on the textbooks simply make the sometimes laborious act of reading more attractive, more exciting, and dare I say, more fun? In the case of studying or reading, however, the notion of fun might seem a little bit out of place, because it implies that you might not be taking seriously whatever it is that you are reading or studying. However, and this is one of my main points, there is a huge difference between being serious and seriousness. So being serious means being authentically committed and invested in something. And this has been defined by Arat Rigoff as actively inhabiting something and then living out its parameters and its consequences. Whereas the value of seriousness is something far more sticky and inevitably bound to class, history, aesthetics, and gender. So in Legally Blonde, seriousness is just how Gavin Butt has described it. This definition here on the screen, a value, one that is demonstrated through the language or attitude of a particular social or professional class. So, Elwood's long-term boyfriend won't marry her because, in his words, he needs someone serious. So she decides to become a law student in a eureka moment where she proclaims, "This is what I need to become serious." Even though she's already got a 4.0 GPA, so she's already clearly academically serious and is also seriously committed to being president and leader of her sorority. But never mind that. Then, when she finally makes it to Harvard Law School, that same boyfriend undermines her achievement, telling her that she needs to be serious about her expectations at the school, contradicting himself to say she could do something more valuable with her time. In these three instances, seriousness is used firstly as a social value, then an aspiration, and then finally as to suggest a somber recognition of limiting beliefs. The fact that Elwoods works hard to get accepted into this prestigious school, only to arrive and find out that no one there will take her seriously, portrays the difference between being serious about something and seriousness as an attitude, value, or aesthetic. This may be in part, of course, to the perceived theatricality of her pink car and her blonde curls. And at the heart of theatricality is, of course, performance. And therefore, by its own nature, it cannot be taken seriously because it is identified with unreality. Performance, like color, is inessential in that it is additional to real life. However, of course, it is revealed through the film that seriousness itself is an equally transparent performance. But, you know, maybe I'm overlooking the fact here that Elwoods can't be taken seriously because Elwoods is simply camp as fuck. Elwoods is, in Susan Sontag's words, serious about the frivolous, as in expert knowledge on chihuahuas and soap operas and hair care, and frivolous about the serious, i.e. applying to law school on a heartbroken whim. But in the final courtroom scene, it is exactly those frivolous interests that end up being so crucial to the operation of successful criminal justice. So, the success of Elwood's defense in that scene goes to show that real seriousness is not high-mindedness, snobbery, or sobriety. It's dedication, rigor, it's authenticity and sincerity. But then, of course, if seriousness is defined in the dictionary as the antonym of fun, is fun always counter to these values? In the case of Elwoods, she says that her pink watermelon scented paper CV adds something extra, but everything about Elwoods is extra. She's an excessive, hyper-aestheticized, fun-loving person, and because of that, Elwoods simply isn't taken seriously. In a world where appearances often denote how seriously the world takes you, seriousness, or rather who or what gets taken seriously, easily morphs into a small p political issue. So, this question of excess and seriousness seems especially pertinent in a time when the UK's government's negotiation of the essential and the non-essential has revealed a deep-rooted bias. When the UK went into lockdown the first time, which is when I wrote this essay, the government-regulated worlds of finance and healthcare were protected without question. Suddenly, there was a drawing up and dividing of what was considered essential and non-essential services. DIY stores like B&Q, takeaways, and laundromats could all stay open, while libraries, skate parks, and nightclubs would be immediately suspended. And by the way, I am of course not questioning the need for such measures at the time. I am more interested in the ideology embedded within them. The idea of essential services implies that there is an essential type of person, a baseline neutral type of person. And this undoubtedly reflects heteronormative, sensible, and serious ideas of what excess is. After looking at the government's published report on obesity and corona, there is undoubtedly a moral agenda to all this. One that suggests that excessive people, which could extend to the potential victims of both chromophobia and essentialism, i.e. Black people, fat people, femme people, and queer people, are seen to threaten the idea of the essential world which they are trying to promote and maintain. So, is art making essential? I have returned to this question many times and continue to interrogate it within the context of the pandemic. What is truly essential depends on the individual. In a meaningless world, it's essential that we continue to construct our own meanings. When lockdown started, my ex-boyfriend's art agent said that it would be immoral for him to go to his studio alone to create work, and that he was being extremely selfish to make the journey there and risk spreading the virus. This opened up a whole argument for us about how essential creative life is to the artist as well as their audiences. Beyond it being a form of essential income, it might be essential to their well-being and the well-being of others. If art is non-essential, am I, as an artist and a teacher of art, a non-essential person? A recent survey circulated on Facebook asked participants to rank jobs in order of necessity. The job of the artist was ranked the least essential profession in the entire world. While many agreed art and creativity may be valuable, in the context of the pandemic, the population at large did not regard art as essential to daily life. From a utilitarian perspective, it's easy to make the case that art is non-essential, just as much as it is deceptively easy to presume the false neutrality of a white cube. However, this implies a very bleak image of what it means to be human. As if identity was just a blank slate to be filled in. As if our bodies were simply just things that needed to be fed, maintained, and then sustained by the essential forms of media and culture, BBC, Amazon, and Netflix. As if our existence was merely survival. In a pre-corona world, there has always been an argument held against art for being merely another faucet of an inflated luxury market. And in reaction to this, it seems to me, a lot of the discourse on contemporary art revolves around seeking its own approval. For the average person, however, I believe that art making can be incredibly empowering, if not continually delayed. Art becomes something to explore once you've taken care of your essential business and fulfilled your role as a productive member of society, aka made enough money to make enough time to be creative. A ridiculous assumption, I would say, especially when we consider the fact that the more essential aspects of society, I'm talking science, religion, law, health, were all forged in the furnace of human creativity itself. These things were not always there. They were first imagined, designed, dreamed, and then created. Like William Blake said, what is now proved was once only imagined. Duh. So, these are my essential excesses, the elements of my life that would be considered non-essential. Art making, vivid color, loud music, casual sex, mosh pits, public dancing, fake nails, and gum. I could, of course, construct an argument explaining the personal, social, spiritual, and political importance of all of them. But today, I think it might be easier to make one simple point. These are my essential excesses. Mine, yours, and countless other excesses paint a picture of what it means to be human. And on this premise, I propose the essential nature of excess, existentialism. Now, having fun is the first tenet of existentialism. In Serious Funzine 1, we proposed that fun was something to be taken seriously. The notion of taking fun seriously, of course, is a contradiction, because seriousness, as I said before, is the antonym of fun. However, during a crisis in which many of us are deprived of the usual activities that shape our lives, we are forced to find new ways to amuse and invigorate ourselves. And it has become clear just how integral fun is to establishing a meaningful life. Thus, fun is a paradox, a meaningless activity that gives our life meaning. Now, I realize that existentialism, like the seriousness of having fun, might be dismissed on the basis of contradiction. However, I recently learned about a whole branch of philosophy called dialetheism, which is dedicated to the notion that there are some contradictions that could be true. For example, there are certain paradoxes that have consistently troubled truth-seeking philosophers, such as the liar's paradox, which is, imagine a person proclaiming, "Everything I say is a lie." Trying to assign a truth value to this statement leads to a contradiction. If the statement is true, then it is also false. But if the sentence states that it is false, and it is false, then it must be true, and so on. The liar's paradox, arguably, is embodied by the artwork Fountain, which is supposed to be one of Marcel Duchamp's most shocking ready-mades, and possibly the most important artwork of the 20th century, even though, of course, this work was not made by Marcel Duchamp at all. It was created by the radical female artist Baroness Ilse von Freytag-Loringhoven, but that's another story for another time. Now, the fountain, as we can see here, was, of course, a porcelain urinal, which represented the antithesis of art at the time in 1919. It was an object of low aesthetic value that was mass-produced and one of utility. Duchamp did not alter this object at all. His only contribution, of course, was to sign it and exhibit it as a work of art. The philosopher Damon Young has suggested that Fountain is not just a radical kind of art. It's a philosophical dialetheia, as in, it's a contradiction that is true. In other words, Fountain is a work of art that isn't a work of art. It's an everyday object that isn't an everyday object. And just like the liar, it is a work of art that screams, "I am not art," from atop a plinth. But it had to be, of course, exhibited by Duchamp in order to make a statement about itself, in order to propose and embody a contradiction that is true. However, this does not sit comfortably with most people, because most people are suspicious, if not scared, of paradoxes. Western philosophy and its many forms of truth-seeking analysis rest on the principle of non-contradiction. Non-contradiction implies that we can only understand one thing by it being distinct from another. For example, to understand what water is, we need to identify the difference between a liquid and a solid. So water is a liquid, yes, but it's also a form of food, of which there can also be solid examples. And thus we have established that water is a liquid, but food can be both liquid and solid. And this is getting very tedious already, as you can see. And it seems like this would only be interesting to the logicians who want to think themselves out of reality and go to bed at night cuddling their theory books like little babies. But in reality, this is the framework of the dominant order. This is our logic. It's how we as human beings in the 21st century perceive and navigate our daily existence. So of course, it would seem, natural to be suspicious of paradoxes and contradictions, because they simply don't make sense to us. And from a very early age, we are taught to fear, fight, or reject the illogical and the unreasonable. But it is this very principle of non-contradiction, left over from the stronghold legacy of racist bigots like Aristotle and Immanuel Kant, that has led us into this big fat mess in the first place. Furthermore, our suspicion of paradoxes is linked to a capitalist colonial mindset, i.e., there cannot be two winners. In order for one to succeed, the other must fail. In order for one to have power, the other one must not. Which is why also I feel that this is also linked to the reason other binaries, as in why day cannot be night, masculine cannot be feminine, and of course the excessive cannot be the essential. When we live in a world built upon binary opposites, contradictions simply cannot be accepted. The dialetheist philosopher Graham Priest has suggested that after a millennia of contemplating the liar's paradox and being no further to a logical answer, the only logical answer is to begin to contemplate the existence of true contradictions. I think that if we as human beings do not have the linguistic or intellectual capacity to conceive and accept that these contradictions can be true, we can at the very least begin to consider it. Contemplating works up to building a tolerance for it. And in a world where immeasurable suffering has been enacted out of binary thinking, perhaps it is time that we start to become more comfortable with contradictions. On the other hand, a widely held criticism of dialetheism is that it refuses to recognize the consequences of itself. If the seriousness of having fun exists as a legitimately true contradiction, does it mean that all contradictions are instantly become true? Considering this for only a moment makes the world seem just as incomprehensible as it truly is. Indeed, some might say there is a grave danger in embracing contradictions right now. If we accept contradictions, should we therefore accept the way in which politicians lie to us? The way in which they instantly reverse policies or deny what is on public record? In answer to this, I would say that there needs to be a recognition of the difference between hypocrisy and contradiction. A contradiction might be described as a logical error. Hypocrisy, on the other hand, is the refusal to address or sometimes even acknowledge a logical or philosophical error. Crucially, the hypocrite denies their contradictions, while the existentialist revels in them. The hypocrite lies to themselves as well as others, attempting but failing to reinstate the principle of non-contradiction. Ultimately, fun is about possibility, and so is excess. Can we learn to live our lives in the context of infinite possibility? Excess is queer in its very essence, and to many that means excess is also essential. But it is the very fact of existentialism, the fact that there is an essential, ever-present and ever-growing excess to our lives that easily throws us into the perils of an existential crisis. This is a crisis rooted in being unable to accept and reconcile this excess, no matter how hard we may have tried. For now, essential excess is perhaps incompatible with capitalism, under which we can only ever conceive things in terms of finite amounts and within the mindset of scarcity. However, I dearly hope that one day this way of thinking will change, and that this zine and this essay, along with the ideas contained within it, will give momentum to the necessary corrupting of the binaries between high and low, essential and excessive, self and other, and most importantly, seriousness and fun. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Angel, for such a glowing talk and an invitation to think about and inhabit the frictions of cognitive dissonance. As I said before, if you could put any questions that you have in the Q&A box, or you can also use the chat function as well, that would be fantastic. And maybe to kick things off whilst you mull over what you want to ask, I thought that something that cut across both your paper and also Nia's Nia, if you could, oh, fantastic, was around utility and utilitarianism. I think it's in terms of how this might link up with or speak to the broader theme of decadence as it cuts across this series. I think this is one of the most important. Both of you were calling into question the ways in which that which is deemed useful is valorized. So in your paper, Nia, you were talking about the politics of uselessness in relation to the politics of adornment. And Angel, in yours, you asked the question, is art making essential? With an implied answer that no, it was not, on the basis of how it is conceived within conservative discourse. And I guess one of the things that I had lurking in the back of mind as I listened to both of these papers was some of Sarah Ahmed's recent work on use and her concept of queer use in particular, whereby an object or a practice is used in ways for which it was not designed or intended. And I think that opens up some wonderfully decadent possibilities potentially, as that which speaks to or looks to resist or push back against the valorization of particular kinds of use relative to unanticipated uses. So I was curious to hear a bit from both of you about what this term queer use means for you. Are you particularly in relation to decadence, but that's really my own agenda. I'm just more interested in what this idea of queer use means for you. Perhaps we could start with you, Nia.
Sure. Thank you for that proposition. I think about, I was writing about, as I was writing about the politics of uselessness, I was also like pushing against myself a bit in thinking about the utility of the word use and how I wasn't sure if I was ready to completely throw it out. In particular, because one of my own kind of Black feminist genealogical sources, Audre Lorde, one of her most transformative essays is the uses of the erotic as power, right? And when we think about queer use, I understand Sarah Ahmed's work as also inside of like a lineage and a genealogy of queer thought that certainly queers the notion of use that I think, yeah, as you said, in conservative discourse. So I think that in some ways, my commitment to uselessness is about a commitment to uselessness for capitalism, a commitment to this notion of always being appropriated and reappropriated and kind of put to use, that I reject, and that also and that rejection also entails an embrace of the use of the erotic as power, entails an embrace of this notion of, yes, like reclaiming that which is discarded. I will take and hold and use for my own benefit that which was constructed to destroy me, or that which was constructed to devalue my body, my voice, my spirit in some way. And so I think about like the reappropriation of glamour in a lot of the photos that I was that I was showing. And, you know, Beyonce, I showed FKA Twigs, I showed various different kind of figures who I think are especially doing this queer use thing. I mean, a long time ago, Jose Munoz called that disidentifying, right? That same act, disidentification, is this notion of taking that which, you know, has been presented to us in, you know, geo-capital, neo-capital space and appropriating it for our own kind of queer of color self-actualization. And so I think that for me, I think for me, the distinction is about where the power lies and which things can be, where the power lies kind of overdetermines for me how I'm using the word use, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think I'm in alignment. I think it's just a matter of like I wonder if there is a way, and I am kind of reaching towards a way to talk about use without use. And I think that it's like without the word use. And I know that what Savannah was pushing back in the panel is, you know, we always like, especially like we're always having to be useful for something. Like, you know, I can't just like love this nail color. Like it has to be like, well, this nail color is like, you know, it represents the sea, and like the deity over my head is Yamaya. And so therefore, like, I'm really like asserting that West African indigenous traditions matter. It's almost like, you know, in Angel's talk too, like, you know, that list of essential things, like, you know, they said I can go into it, why they matter or not, right? But it feels like to me that there must always like, what am I doing alive if it's not like for the movement? If I get any money, like I'm always like, I better go put this, you know, I better go bail some people out. I better go like really, you know, make this count like 20-fold. And I think there's this notion that there's this kind of internalized belief system that I'm fighting against, that I am not enough, that we are not enough. And that unless we are being useful, unless we are being productive. And so I think that's what I'm kind of trying to push against. And that you opening up the space of capitalist use, if we're going to distinguish it in capitalist productivity, distinguish it from this notion of like erotic use or like soul, spirit, ineffable, the thing that capitalism tries to smush. Yeah.
And that would seem to speak to the question that you asked earlier, Angel, as well, with regards to, it makes you think about what the utility of the artist is as one of another kind of contradiction, another kind of cognitive dissonance to add to the list that you were walking us through. Yeah, is that something you want to speak to, Angel?
Yeah, well, just in answer to this question of uselessness, I come to that, I think, more through the idea and the kind of like framework and philosophy that me and Gloop we're trying to set up in Serious Fun. So in that, you know, fun is essentially useless. It's something that doesn't have a point, a destination, or an outcome, and is defined as such, you know, by dictionaries as being different from pleasure in that it doesn't have a more serious or final outcome. So when you say something, when you're doing something not seriously, you're just doing it for fun. And this is kind of could also be the implication that it's a waste of time. And so then that leads into this idea of it being a kind of like anti-productivity, possibly anti-capitalist, in the sense that it doesn't have, you know, a final reason for happening other than enjoyment for the sake of enjoyment. That's why I'm trying to say fun is. And this links to art, and I wanted to mention this because Owen, who's here, was so integral to me even considering this. When I first met Owen, it was, I think I was in my second year at Goldsmiths, and we were just sitting in these painful crits where everyone would just do, you know, just keep asking, well, why are you doing that? Why are you using this color? Why have you moved this shape 2 centimeters to the left? You know, why are you doing these actions? And then I met Owen, and he was showing me this artwork where he's just like sitting on a ladder, I think half naked. And I was like, because I was being trained in the Goldsmiths kind of way, you know, I was like, well, why are you doing that? And he was like, well, I'm just doing it for fun. I'm just doing it because I wanted to do it. And I do lots of my artworks because they're things I just want to do or experience. So I was like, whoa, this is like such a mind-blowing moment to me that you could just make artwork that was for fun. So I guess that's like, that's kind of where I started thinking about fun, and fun being like like a queer technique or morality. And I guess why me and Gloop started to write about it as being an important, like excessive, useless thing. And that comes off the back of us like being the biggest club rats ever, and we're going to nightclubs and partying. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying those things are going to change the world. I'm saying that they're not. So I guess like those, I'm going around in circles here now, but yeah, this was the idea that fun in itself, being a kind of useless, pointless thing, could be put to use. And that's my response to the question about the queer use.
Fantastic, thank you both. We have this isn't a question, but it is, well, it sort of is a question. So, what are your social media handles? Maybe you could put that in the chat once you have a moment. And whilst other people have a chance to think of their own questions, I have one for you, Nia, which is about the relationships between the sacred and the profane. So one of the things I really loved about your paper was the invitation to think about the sacred in relation not only to the erotic, but by virtue of the frame that this talk has been presented in relation to decadence as well. And I guess in a crass sense of the term decadence, it's often conflated with that which might be deemed profane. But you know, historically, decadence has spoken to the spiritual in all sorts of ways, either through Catholicism in the 1890s or through the occult. And I guess just a little plug for next week on the 31st, we have a seminar on theatre decadence and the occult. But I think that there's something here that's worth diving into in a little bit more depth, I think, about how you conceive of these relationships between the sacred and the profane in the 21st century.
I think that I think that we're living in the result of the fear of all things dark. That includes dark people, that includes dark spaces, from caves to like deep water, outer space wombs. Yeah, so we're living like in the troubled dystopic fantasy of on the other side of the Enlightenment binary. So in that sense, it feels to me like how I understand the sacred and profane. So like in a Western understanding, right, the sacred is that which is light and expansive and above ground, right? And the opposite, right? And masculine. So how I'm thinking about it, in particular with the work around Priestess of Twerk, it's not unintentional that I am really drawn to these two different underworld encounters and these underworld mythologies as a way out or a way in to a reapprehension of the sacred as also as encompassing, and many indigenous philosophies and cosmologies always already encompass that which is the sacred as deeply contradictory, as deeply multiply constituted and paradoxical, that death and birth are together, that dark and light are together or need each other, symbiotic in some way. And so I think about like, yeah, that which is decaying as part of that visit to the underworld, and that which is composting, and that which is the things that are the shadow selves, and all of that which we kind of push away and push down. And then that comes out as actual harm on earth and bodies. The capitalism's and racism's devalued bodies, that actually there is a surfacing that I think is, that I'm seeing slowly, but also that I think is kind of a part of this great turning that is, that we're at the crossroads of. I won't say that we're on, because I really don't know where we're on right now. But I think that we're in a process of a great turning, and that part of, and that if it is to be anything sacred, it must account for darkness, underworld decay, Blackness and the fecundity inside of all of those spaces.
Thank you. We have a few questions coming in now. We've had a request to see the clip mentioned earlier. Let's hold on to that just for the moment. Let's definitely play it before we wrap up, though. We have a question for Angel. The idea of contradiction reminded me of the centrality of paradoxical states within the decadent tradition. But there's also a certain idea of refinement in decadence, which might be seen as seriousness in contrast to, say, pop culture references. Is there anything to be said about the notion of fun from a decadent perspective in light of this? Oh, and that's Alice Conde.
Can I ask a question back in that what is meant by refinement?
The webinar format could make it quite difficult for Alice to respond. Oh, here we go. So like serious artistic refinement.
That's still, I mean, what does it mean to be refined though? I think that in my my presentation, that refinement would be equated to what I defined as to be serious about something, to be invested, committed, and authentically committed to something. So that would be how if someone said, what is serious artistic refinement, I would say that it's more to do with being seriously invested in what you're creating. And that I don't know. And do I see, and then the question is, do I see what might be serious? I think that it's that's a tough question. It's more of a conversation than a question, I think. So what is the question? It's about the kind of difference between a pop culture reference and then something to do with the more weighted tradition, shall we say?
So there's a clarification a bit further on. So
okay, I see.
Regards to beauty, but maybe also intellectual refinement and snobbery.
And
that could potentially be something that we come back to later too. I actually have a question of my own linked to that, but let's come back to that a little bit later on. We have a question from Owen Parry. Owen, you should be able to just switch your camera on, I think, for this.
Yeah, I can do that. Hey guys, I feel like I've been lurking in the background. Yeah, thanks so much for those presentations. They were absolutely amazing. My question is kind of related, or it links maybe both of your presentations. Angel, you talked about this idea of, I think you said affective inhabitation as a form of seriousness.
Yeah.
The idea of like, to take something seriously is to almost like live it out. So it's not, so it bleeds into life. So it's like more excessive than just, yeah, it kind of bleeds into life. And then I was wondering, Nia, in your work, particularly the work around participation and dressing up and adornment, I was wondering whether that idea of kind of affective inhabitation in the idea of like the kind of fictional space that you're creating, whether that also has a bleed, like an excessive bleed into reality, or whether you could say something about the importance of play and excess in relation to, yeah, that maybe like bleeding into life. So I'm not sure if it's a direct question, but it's a connecting of both your papers in some way. So.
Angel, do you want to address it first, or?
I'll just say, yeah, that's an interesting question for you. And the definition that he was referring to is actively inhabiting something and then living out its parameters and its consequences.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I think I want the simple way. I want to say yes. And I want to say, like, you know, I think that in some ways there is this identity that's being called up and called out and called in my piece, right? It's Black woman and femme, right? And so in that sense, like that, I feel like that is already in and of itself, like, what is it? An effective inhabitation, if that's the term. Excuse me for if I'm misnaming your term. But, you know, I think that that kind of gets at already. Like, so I think that the first response is that, like, already we are interpolated into this particular identity and like having to play inside of it in life, right? So it's already, I think it already feels a very high stakes form of play. And like already that we're living. And so then in the entry of Priestess of Twerk, a Black femme temple to pleasure, I feel like, yeah, the invitation is then to create a space that is harm reduced enough to play inside of that in ways that are not actually possible inside of the world as we know it. And so to actually get a space to that will then, you know, my hope, I can't actually say, but I do believe that like somatic and psychosomatic experiences change how we are in the world. I do. And so in that sense, yeah, I do want to, like, my heart hopes that by virtue of having a level of stretch inside and play and possibility inside of Black women and femme identity, which has otherwise been so deeply ascribed and with so little agency, that is a healing act in and of itself. That yes, adorning and that saying, yes, this works for me, no, that doesn't work for me, which we're all doing all the time anyway, but the piece is making us hyper conscious of that process. And it's also like asking us to lean all the way into pleasure, lean all the way out of respectability, lean all the way into just like whatever is calling us in the moment, and like being this improvised version of ourselves inside of this, you know, whatever 3-hour period. And so in that, and that, yeah, that then that would hopefully offer some more expansive possibilities. I mean, it's the same with, like, you talk about club, like, it's the same. It's like, yeah, like going to the club changes me. Yeah, like I'm different the next day, and I'm also different in my life, in the way that I live my life. Like I don't give a fuck about so much more because I go to the club, you know, because I party. I did, right? So yeah. Like, you know, but like at the same time, it's like, yes, is this changing policy? Is this that? No. It's not doing any of those things on purpose, because like fucking Black women are out there changing policy. They're doing all that already. Like we're already doing that. We're like leading it, okay? But also like, I think, yeah, this notion coming back to uselessness, coming back to play, coming back to this notion of like, yeah, that like, hopefully that's the result. Yeah, but I kind of don't care also. Like, I just kind of want them to experience this, and I want to experience it. And I think that, yeah, I do. I don't think I'd be doing it if I didn't think we'd be like better on the other side in some kind of abstract way. But I also can't really name what that is. And it feels important to not name it and not have to name it.
Everything that you just said, like, and your project and ideas that you just laid out, like resonated so much with me of my own experience of club culture. And I'm so excited by all your ideas. I loved it. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be incredible. And I always, you know, perceived like my nightclub experience to be like a very transcendental experience. And, you know, I just love that you explicitly linked, it seems like you're going to explicitly link the kind of club aspects with this other sort of spiritual aspect, you know, which is what the nightclub is missing, isn't it? Because it has the community, the adornment, the agency, the release of inhibitions, but then there's also this dedicated space for healing. And I just think it's going to be so wonderful to, you know, see those two things together in your work. It's really cool.
Thank you. And your framings are like so helpful too. I was really like, oh, this actually helps me articulate some things. Yeah.
A comment from Joe Machin, and also the Girls' Night Out as itself a form of ritual, as politically active. We're at 8 o'clock, and as we've come back to the work itself, I think now might be a good time to go back to Lou's request to see that clip that we didn't have time to play in your talk, Nia.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Play that now. That would be fantastic.
Great.
And then in the chat, whilst that's happening, Callum has asked for people to put down their favourite London nightclub. Mine's Corsica Studios.
I want to go to London and go to the nightclub. If this was a real talk, we could go out after this. Okay, so I'm gonna share. Are you ready for me to share now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Okay. And 39:20.
Feet up. Preparing your body to invoke. Yes, slow at first. And you, all of you, please join us in prayer and repeat after me. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. Audre Lorde. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. Audre Lorde. You want to fly? You got to give up the shit that weighs you down. Toni Morrison. You want to fly? You got to give up that shit that weighs you down. Toni Morrison. Those parts of yourself that you desperately want to hide and destroy will gain power over you. Parts of yourself that you desperately want to hide and destroy will gain power over you. Janet Mock. Black women, Black femmes, we in the underworld invite you to join us in the blessing of twerking, inherited from our mothers and our grandmothers and all the ones that came before. We twerk to feel joy. We twerk to feel live. We twerk to release. We twerk to commune. Join us. Come down. Spread out anywhere on this living altar. Come, please, twerk with us.